once again, we are back to do more of our virtual semester here at the Alabama Program in Sports Communication. I am Andrew Billings. I am the Executive Director of the APSC, and I am honored and privileged to have one of the biggest sports figures that you'll find connected to the state of Alabama, Mr. Paul Finebaum. Paul, thanks so much for joining us.
Andy, it's a pleasure. I've been looking forward to doing this for a very long time. I was hoping to be in the classroom, though, but maybe one day soon.
Hopefully soon, but in the meantime, we at least have this, and we're thankful for this chance to talk about one of our favorite subjects here at Alabama, which is college football and the role it plays. So our thought for this interview was that a few years back we had your book, My Conference Can Beat Your Conference. And we really wanted to look at, do those principles still hold in your mind? So I guess that's that opening question. Do you still think we can make just as a voracious a case that the SEC is the epicenter of college football?
Oh, I don't think there's any question. When that book came out, the SEC was on a 6 or 7 year run, and tragically, I say, Auburn let it slip away in 2013. And it's still the most dominant conference. It may not win every year, although it did last year. But it's always in contention. It's the most heavily watched and rated college package there is on Saturday afternoon. And there are outliers, of course, like Clemson in recent years, but year in, year out, the world revolves around the SEC and mostly Alabama.
Yeah, I guess that begs that question. The SEC motto is "It just means more." I'm sure there's other individual programs, a Clemson, a Ohio State, and Oklahoma, whatever it might be, that say they fall into that category. But is it still the case that pretty much conference-wide, it just means more in the SEC?
Yeah, if you look at the NFL draft, which is the new barometer, the statistics are just, they're not even overwhelming. They're astronomically overwhelming. Every year it's just one SEC player after another, and that's really the measuring stick. Not only championships, but how many players from that league go to the pros. So yeah, that idea came up years ago, and it was more just on a whim by some New York publisher, and it's held up pretty well. That book came out in 2013, and 7 years later, not much has changed, Andy.
Well, I guess that lends to this time period that we're in, where I think as we've gone through this national pandemic, people have started to realize football is about far more than football. That especially at a lot of these major schools, it is the place where your alums are most likely to come back is for a football game, and it's part of that rite of passage of what it means to be the quintessential American students. So there feel like there's a lot of tentacles that go far beyond sports to the rituals that college football play.
Yeah, I've been battling this my entire career, the argument back and forth about the importance of football, but I don't think it can be undervalued or understated how important it is to every single university. And you start, you just ask the college president at Alabama or at Auburn or anywhere else, and if they don't want to give you an honest answer, put them in a lie detector test or a polygraph test, and you will find out very quickly that college football moves the needle. About the only president I've heard recently who didn't acknowledge that is the president of the University of Michigan when he began debating the importance of playing football without students, if that ended up being the case. It may not be in terms of the budgetary bottom line the biggest part of any university, because research plays a tremendous role, but in terms of the reputation of the university, just let's talk about Alabama for a second. You can walk down really any major street in America and have a conversation about Nick Saban and the University of Alabama. You can't do that about other facets of the university. I think if you go back to was it 2012 or 2013 when the former president and chancellor at the University of Alabama, Robert Witt, said he told 60 Minutes that the hiring of Nick Saban was the single most important decision in terms of employment the university's ever made. That's covering quite a bit of territory, and he also backed up the salary, which I remember covering that story. And there was a member of the board of trustees at Alabama in 2007 who opined, and it was quoted in the Birmingham News, that why are we paying CEO type salaries for a head football coach? Nobody's raising that issue any longer, I can assure you.
Yeah, when you look at the athletic department budget, or revenues have gone up about $90 million per year. Even a salary like Saban seems small in comparison. And I guess part of that financial equation is many times you're only as strong as your TV contracts. And what's interesting now is the CBS contract coming to an end. And that seemed to be a great deal for CBS. And so it appears even more funds are going to be coming to SEC schools in that new iteration, because the CBS deal turned out to be quite a sweetheart deal for the network. And I would say undervalued the prime SEC matchup each week.
Yeah, I mean, if you go back, the CBS contract that is beginning to wind down was done, I believe, in 2008. We were in the midst of a financial crisis, and it looked like a really good deal to go in 15 years on a major network. But television and media has changed so dramatically since then. And going back to just the amount of money, and I've talked to executives at all the networks, and they're making this deal with the hope that Nick Saban is at Alabama for many more years, because he's the key player in the value of SEC football right now. And back to the salary for just a second. He makes $8 or $9 million a year. If Nick Saban had the same success at a Fortune 500 company, just pick from a major bank, a major brokerage firm, a major retailer, a major entertainment company like the one I work for, he would be making, with stock options, $50 to $75 million a year. I mean, he's worth that much. And he's not the only one, but he's the most valuable one. And in relation to television contracts, you're always gambling a little bit on the future when it comes to sports and television. But it's been proven time and time again. And certainly we experienced it during the, especially the first couple of months of the pandemic, with no sports. Fans and viewers had no earthly idea what to do. And when live sports started to resurface, we gravitated back to them, no matter what they looked like and in what shape or form. So live sports is the most important thing where I work at ESPN. It's the most important thing at CBS and Fox and NBC, who have NFL football. There's some sports that don't gravitate as well toward big numbers, but college and pro football the numbers are gargantuan. And one other thing, I was in Hollywood last summer, involved in pitching a sitcom prospect, and I learned quite a bit about the importance of football. They tell me in our meetings that you want to be early in the week on a sitcom, and I said, well, why does it matter? He said, because you'll be promoted on Sunday, the Sunday afternoon and the Sunday night NFL shows, which have the largest audiences. And we're talking about audiences of anywhere from 20 to 40 million people, depending on what time of the year it is.
Yeah. I think that's interesting when, I think NFL ratings get a bigger number because there's fewer games. But when we look at the aggregate number of people who are watching college football on a given Saturday, all of a sudden you realize one college football game's, top competition is three other games that happen to be at the exact same time.
No, I mean the college schedule on television is just unbelievable. I mean, I go back to a time in my early life a couple of years ago when there was one college football game on a Saturday. I mean, now it starts in the Central Time Zone at 11 a.m. There's the 11 a.m. window. There's the 2:30, 3 p.m. window, and then there's the all night window. And then there are games in between with countless networks from CBS and NBC and Fox and ABC and SEC and ACC and ESPN and ESPN2 and ESPN. I mean, it is endless. And we both know people, and we won't admit to doing it ourselves, who literally park themselves in front of the television on a
Yeah.
Saturday morning and never leave.
Yes, if anything, I know a lot of people who aren't as big NFL fans simply because they can't do it back-to-back days. They are so invested on Saturday. One criticism that we get, though, with college football is that it's become too regional, that it's too southern, that it doesn't feed into a national audience as much anymore. How fair is that criticism, and how much of it is really you just need to have one region against another? You know, if Southern Cal return to its glory or something like that, would that blunt that argument?
I think it's fair to a point, and I didn't realize it as much until the last 2 years. I've spent 3 nights a week in New York the last two football seasons, and that is not a good place to go talk college football, especially in September and October. Now, once the season starts picking up, it becomes more intense, and part of that is because the calendar. You have other sports competing, especially in the Northeast baseball, which doesn't end until the end of October, and then the NBA starts, and it becomes a very crowded calendar. But last year, I would do the ESPN morning show Get Up, and it seemed like college football was an afterthought until you started getting to the major games. And the week of the LSU Alabama game last year, it finally took over and never lost its foothold. And some of that is the scheduling is not very good. You see the big games the first week or two, and then you get into a long list of conference games. Some are interesting, some aren't. But yeah, I think the biggest negative of the college football playoff, whose ratings have not who have gone the wrong way, quite frankly, is that it has been very regional. I mean, how many times have we had an Alabama Clemson game? This year we had an LSU Clemson game. I mean, those are not games that are going to attract a lot of eyeballs in Detroit or Seattle or LA or New York for that matter. I mean, you're talking about Clemson, Alabama. You can drive there in about 5.5 hours. That's not what you want. I mean, you want the Ohio States and the Southern Cals, maybe a Penn State. But regardless of all that, Alabama is still currently the biggest draw in college football. So it may sound regional if you're sitting in Tuscaloosa, but Alabama is a national brand. Ohio State's a national brand, but a lot of schools are not.
Well, I guess that leads to the final question here, which I know you've gotten a fair bit, so I'll try and tweak it a little bit here. Is this Alabama dynasty the biggest dynasty that college football's ever had? And if so, can you pinpoint a moment? Because I think I have an opinion on that too. But do you think this is the greatest run ever? And if so, when did it move into that territory?
Yeah, I think it has, and there are some moments. Nebraska had a run, Miami had a run, but nobody has had a sustained run like this. And I covered the last 2 years of Coach Bryant, and he was trying in 1980 to win his third straight, and had he done that, we may be having a slightly different conversation. But Nick Saban has gotten there a couple of times, and then he's fallen back. I was on a show the other day talking about is time running out for Saban, and in some ways it is because of his age. But he doesn't need another championship to I think to have already cemented the greatest coach label. Now, by the way, that's the second time in my journalism career I've labeled a certain Alabama coach as the greatest coach ever, which is just utterly amazing even to me. But I think when you back to your original point, I there were some moments early on. I've always wondered about. I felt like there were two moments in the 2008 season which Alabama didn't win a title that I felt like we knew this was for real when they beat Clemson in that opener, and then finally a couple weeks later at Georgia, it just felt like this thing was never going to stop. And even though it took another year to win the title, beating Florida in that 2009 SEC championship game, which was a de facto national title, at that moment, I felt like there would be a number of titles. I'm really interested to be the interviewer here. What moment did you remember as the
To me,
tipping point?
if I'm trying to think of the moment where you say Alabama has not just established itself, but is the greatest dynasty, it's the ability to call an onside kick in the fourth quarter of a national championship game, because it was a couple different messages. It was, we're seeing something that we can exploit, and we feel so confident that we built up enough credibility, enough base that that you could assuredly do something that risky at that point in time. At that point, you knew, okay, even if it hadn't worked out, people would say, well, it's Saban, he's built up the credibility. There are very few coaches who I think could have made that call.
Yeah, and in that call, Saban has often said he really, as great as the call was, and it may very well go down as one of the greatest ever, he didn't have a choice. I mean, his defense was playing so poorly at the time; they were so worn out, and I mean, if his career had ended right then, it would have still been amazing. But the walk-off against Georgia just solidified that. And I'm sitting here wondering, I think he is tied with Coach Bryant at 6 championships, and I think he really desperately wants another one, but it is not going to define him. I mean, his career has been cemented, and for one reason, I think if you go back to 2008, Andy, it's a statistic that's often mentioned, but the fact that Alabama at some point, and a couple of times it's happened only on the last day of the year, Alabama has been number 1 in the country every single year since then at some point in the season is truly the most remarkable statistic to support a dynasty I have ever seen.
Well, I certainly have 2 children who have been incredibly spoiled by this. And I still remember when I moved here in 2011 after teaching at Clemson. And the big question they had was, well, what happens if Alabama and Clemson play for the national title? And I said, oh, there's so many teams and it's so hard to do. I can't imagine that would ever happen in the same year. So it's been interesting for them to watch as that's happened time and time again. This has been great talking to you, Paul. I know you can talk about this all day because you often do talk about it all day. But I know the students here at Alabama appreciate you taking the time. And like we said, we really do hope that the next time you get to interact with the students, it's in person, because certainly you're popular around here.
Well, it's, because we've had too many conversations about this. It's one of my bucket lists to spend more time in a classroom than I did when I was a student. And I really look forward to that very, very much. Thanks for including me, Andy. Thank you very, very much.
Terrific. Thanks so much, Paul.